Thank you very much for everyone for your patience. Hi everyone, my name is Jie Ren. I'm very honored to be here today at UCL Center for Artificial Intelligence. I'm very glad to share my recent work with you. I'm currently a senior research scientist at Google Brain. My research interests reliable deep learning, out of distribution detection, and uncertainty estimation, with a focus on biological and biomedical applications. The title of my talk today is Reliable Deep Anomaly Detection. Next, please. So in today's talk, I would like to start with a few basic concepts in this research field, and then show you some real world application to help you understand why this is an important field. And then I will explain why this problem is very challenging and some possible solutions people propose. And after the introduction, I will present two pieces of my work. One is exploring the limits of OOD detection, and the other is an application-focused work on detecting the unseen conditions in dermatology. Next, please. Next, please. So in an ideal world, we would like to have the P test follow the same distribution as P training, right? So that the model we learn from the training data can be generalized well to the test. However, in the real world application, that's never the case, especially when the model is deployed to a new environment. So in a new environment, we often see the following types of distributional shift. The first type is called a covariant shift, where the distribution of the features P of X changes. This is quite common, so you can see that sometimes the image can have corruptions or noise added, so the quality of the image can be degraded. And for example, in the self-driving car, the image quality can be affected by the weather or the light. Another issue with the distributional shift is the so-called out-of-distribution detection. People often also call it open set recognition or anomaly detection. And this is the focus of our topic today. This reflects the scenario where we have new classes showing up at the test time. For example, we train a classifier for classifying dog, cat, and fish. But at the test time, we have some birds images showing up. And we want our model to prevent making any prediction for those birds because it's never learned by the model. And so this is called out of distribution detection. Next, please. So out of distribution detection problem is very common in real application. Here I show one example in the medical image analysis. Suppose we want to predict skin conditions based on the image. And there are some common skin conditions like acne or eczema. Those frequent conditions, like we have a lot of examples for training. But on the other hand, we also have some rare conditions where we do not have enough training examples. So when we train the model, we can only train a model with for those common conditions. But when we deploy the model to the real world, the model will be exposed to those unknown, like rare conditions. So note that the rare conditions, although they are rare individually, collectively they are actually common. So the model will be exposed to those rare conditions. And then we want the model to know that there are some images from the unknown conditions, and the model should not predict those rare conditions into one of the training classes. So we want in other words, well, we want the model to be able to say this input belongs to none of the above. Next, please. So another like a similar example is classification of the genomic sequences. Suppose we want to build a classifier for bacteria species based on their DNA sequences. So bacteria detection is a very important problem for diagnosis and the treatment of infectious disease. But our knowledge for the bacteria is still limited. Although we discover new bacteria every year, but we still have a lot of unknown bacteria to be discovered. So when we train a classifier, we can only train the classifier for all the known bacteria species. But when we deploy the model to the real data contains not only the known bacteria species, but also some unknown species. So the same way, our model need to have this awareness for those out of distribution input, and should be able to prevent making any predictions for those unknown species. Next, please. Okay, so those are the motivations why we want to study this problem. So you may wonder how well our model perform on this type of tasks, like OOD detection tasks. Is it a really challenging problem? So before we evaluate that, we need to define some evaluation metrics. So let us first use this simple benchmark, CIFAR10 versus SVHN, as an example. So suppose we train a classifier for CIFAR10 using the training data in CIFAR10 dataset. And at the test time, our model will be exposed to CIFAR10 test input and SVHN test input. And SVHN is supposed to be the OOD test input. And we want to define a confidence score so that it gives high confidence for the in-distribution test input and a low confidence score for the OOD inputs. And as a metric for evaluation, people commonly use AUROC to evaluate the separation between the out of distribution and in distribution under the confidence score. If the AUROC score is 1, then it means using this confidence score, we are able to perfectly separate all the inputs from the in distribution input. Next, please. So you may ask, what are the common confidence scores? So one of the most commonly used score is called maximum of softmax probability, or MSP. This is just the maximum of the softmax probability score over the K classes. And ideally, we want the model to have 1 over K confidence for the OOD input, so that the model does not favor any in-distribution class for the OOD input. Another very commonly used score is called the Mahalanobis distance. So this measures the distance between the test input to the training distribution. So in particular, it first extracts the last layer embeddings for the training inputs, and then it fits a Gaussian distribution for each in-distribution class using the training data. And then at the test time, it computes the distance, the Mahalanobis distance, from the test input to the fitted Gaussian distribution. And if the distance is high, then it may indicate this is OOD input. So the idea is very simple. Next, please. So given all that kind of settings, now we can evaluate how well our deep neural networks perform on OOD detection. Here we show a very simple 2-moon simulations with 2 in-distribution classes, the orange and the blue, and 1 OOD class in red. Ideally, on the left-hand side, we want to see that the model have high confidence for the in-distribution region and low confidence for the OOD region. However, if we train a binary classification model for using deep neural networks to classify the 2 classes, and what we see is on the right-hand side, we will see that the OOD region actually have a high confidence score. And the only low confidence score region is the region around the decision boundary. So this is not desirable, especially for OOD detection task. This confidence score here, we use MSP as a confidence score. So at least here we see that the MSP, based on the deep neural networks, does not help us to detect OOD inputs. Next, please. So I want to be more concrete and make it more intuitive for you to understand why this OOD detection is so challenging. We characterize the OOD detection task into two categories. One is far OOD, where, for example, we consider CFAR as in distribution and SVHN as out of distribution. And we know that CFAR and SVHN, they have very different semantic meaning and also very different stylistics. So they are very different from each other. So some simple statistics can actually help to distinguish the two. Another type of OOD detection is near OOD detection. Here, for example, we have CFAR 100 as in distribution and CFAR 10 as out of distribution. For distinguishing CFAR 100 versus CFAR 10, note that here CFAR 100 and CFAR 10, they are non-overlapping. So in total, there are 110 classes. So in order to detect, like distinguish the two, this is more challenging because sometimes the class in CFAR 100 can have very similar semantic meaning with some class in CFAR 10. For example, in CFAR 100, we have the class called pickup track. And in CFAR 10, we have the class track. So in order to distinguish the two, the model really need to understand the subtle difference between the two classes. And another case is that sometimes the class in distribution and class in out of distribution may share similar background. So for example, the fish class in CFAR 100 have blue background, and the airplane in CFAR 10 also sometimes can have blue background. So in order to distinguish the two, the model really need to understand the semantic versus the background and to really focus on the semantic part instead of background. So I hope this kind of toy example can help you to understand and give you some intuition why this is a challenging problem. Okay, next please. So far, next please. Okay, yeah, so far, multiple ways have been proposed for improving the OOD detection performance. In my talk today, I will cover the following four categories. They are orthogonal to each other, so they can be combined to boost the performance. The first way is to improve the representation learning. A better representation learning can help to avoid feature collapse so that the model will better understand the semantic differences. The second is outlier exposure. So if we have all the examples during the training, we can make use of it. And using outlier exposure is a very effective way to improve the OOD detection. The third category is ensembling, where we can average predictions over different models to improve the robustness of the model. The fourth category is fitting a density model in the latent space, as Mohanobis distance does. Okay, next please. So in the first part of my talk, I will focus on this challenging near OOD detection task and exploring the limits of the OOD performance. This is a joint work with my colleague Balaji at Google and Stan at Stanford. Next, please. This piece of work, in this piece of work, it will cover the techniques for better representation learning, outlier exposure, and density modeling in the latent space. Next, please. Yeah, now I'm going to present the first work, exploring the near OD detection. Next slide, please. Yes, okay. So for the far OD task, like CFAR versus SVHN, this task has been extensively studied. And because it's easier task, so the best method has achieved 99% AUROC. But we are more interested in this near OD task, where the in and out may have similar semantics, and it's harder to distinguish the two. For this CFAR 100 versus CFAR 10, this task is more challenging, and so far the best performance before our work, the best performance was only 85%. Next slide, please. So different methods have been proposed to tackle this near OD task, including the baseline MSP, Mahalanobis distance, and some Bayesian neural networks with Gaussian process as the last layer, or some hybrid model that combines generative models and discriminative model. But still, the best performance was still only 85%. So at the time, we explored a lot, and we were curious to know whether this is really indeed a very challenging problem, especially whether this is a really challenging problem even for human. So we did a very interesting experiment. Next, please. Stan made a software. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think there is a little bit time delay, sorry. So we made a software where we randomly show a set of 20 images from CFAR dataset, and we ask the user to pick up the ones belonging to CFAR 10. So this is to test the human performance. And we actually found the human performance is not that bad. It's around the 95%. So, so indeed, the task is not that challenging. So the model should have the room to improve. Then next slide, please.
Hi, may I ask a question here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so do you provide labels for people? Because the previous task is kind of the based on classification task, right? You do the OD detection. But
yeah, so we list the CFAR 10 labels to the user. And so we ask them to pick up those images belong to those labels.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so although it's not exactly the same setting as the experiment, but this kind of evaluate the rough performance of human. It give us a reference to understand the task. Okay, so so at the same time, we noticed this VIT model, vision transformer model. This model seemed to be very powerful. It splits an image into fixed sizes, patches, and linearly embed each of them and add the position embeddings and feed the vector into a standard transformer encoder. And the output of the encoder is used for the classification task. It's pre-trained on a large data set like ImageNet 21K or GFT, and then fine-tuned on the downstream tasks. We noticed that the fine-tuned CFAR accuracy is pretty high, especially for the CFAR 100, comparing with previously like the wide ResNet training from scratch. The VIT model actually achieved more than 10% improvement in the distribution accuracy. So at the time, we were curious about what is the performance of OD detection for this VIT model. Next, please. So it turned out that the VIT model actually has much better OD performance than the previous SOTA. Like here, you can see with the Mahalanobis distance, we are able to achieve 96% AUROC for this CFAR 100 versus CFAR 10 task, which is roughly at the same level as the human performance. So this means actually the VIT model is very powerful on in-distribution prediction and as well as out-of-distribution detection. And we want to better understand why is that. So next slide, please. To better understand the improvement, we project the embeddings into 2D space. So here we show two in distribution classes. One is sunflower, the other one is turtles, and another OOD class, automobile. As you can see from the left figure, which is the embedding from the ResNet model, training from scratch, you can see the OOD points overlapping with the in-distribution points. But after we use the VIT model, on the right-hand side, you will see that the in-distribution points and out-of-distribution points, they are very well separated, and the points are clustered tightly. So this explains why the VIT model has better performance on OOD detection. It seems like they learned very good representation in the embedding space. Next, please. And the next question is whether this good performance is due to pre-training or due to model architecture. So we did an ablation study for model architecture. So we not only consider VIT, but also consider other big pre-trained model like BIT, big transfer, or MLP mixers. So BIT is a ResNet-based model, and MLP mixer is a multi-layer perceptron-based model. From here, you can see the first row, the BIT model R50. It has only 88% AURC. But with a BIT bigger model, R11, we are able to increase the performance to 90%. However, if you compare the numbers with the VIT model, they are still lower than the VIT. And for MLP mixers, the performance are roughly at the same level as VIT and higher than BIT. So this indicates that the pre-training helps more for VIT and MLP mixers than it helps for BIT. Next slide, please. So we also, although we have reached very high AURC, we still want to look at the failure cases where our model cannot predict well for the OOD detection. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in this slide, you will see that here are some failure cases where the OOD images have very close distance to the in-distribution, and they are wrongly predicted as in-distribution. So we look at those images, and we found actually they are pretty similar to the in-distribution images shown on the second row. So those mistakes actually made due to the mislabeling or ambiguity in the images. Okay, so next we want to, with the success in the vision task, next we want to see whether this pre-training fine-tuning idea can be transferred to other data modality. So we explore this genomic benchmark. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
With regards to the distance, how do you decide about the threshold, about whether it belongs to, whether it's in distribution or out of distribution?
Yeah, so the distance can be varies. So in order to, so AURC, the score AURC is actually distance, AURC score is a measure of the average performance over different threshold. So we do not decide one single threshold, but we use AURC as the overall performance.
Okay.
Okay.
May I ask another question, please?
Sure.
Just to make sure I understood correctly,
Mm-hmm.
does this work detect out of distribution samples or just improves the performance on out of distribution samples?
So I didn't quite understand your question. You want to?
You are reporting better performance on out of distributions, right?
Yeah.
But can we detect these out distribution? Can the model say I don't know? Can the model say none of the above?
Yeah. So we are evaluating the OOD performance based on the AUROC score, which measures the separation between the in distribution and out of distribution under the confidence score. So if the AUROC score is high, it indicates that we can better separate the two distributions. And if we really want to apply this method to real application, we need to set a threshold. So this threshold can be determined by the needs of the real application. For example, if you want to control false positive rate at like 90%, sorry, 5% false positive rate, then you can choose a threshold corresponding to that. It really depends on the real application you want to apply to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Hi,
sure. Thanks.
I have a question about the previous content. So you mentioned like VIT has better OD detection performance. So is that because of the VIT can capture like more global information, which is correlation between the patches, rather than in traditional like CN or ResNet, they may overfit to some local features like textures, which may not relate with semantics. So any intuition about why VIT is better to detect OD images?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We actually explored a lot. So from my side, I think maybe this is just a hypothesis. Maybe the BIT, the ResNet, because it has a desired feature, it has a complicated architecture, so it may constrain the learning procedure during the training. That's just my hypothesis. But to fully understand why the VIT is better than BIT, I think more ablation study need to be done, and we don't have a good answer to that yet.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think I hope others can have some concrete experiment to work on this and understand why it's better. From my understanding, it's like I have the same feeling as you. VIT and MLP mixer may be more flexible to capture the global feature and also adjust to the pre-training data set. So as you can see from the table that although BIT and the VIT, they have similar performance for the in-distribution accuracy, they actually have, the BIT have lower OOD performance. So that's very interesting to us. So for what reason the BIT cannot have a good feature for OOD detection? This is still unknown to me.
Yeah, so I guess there might be a case like a classifier has higher in-distribution classification accuracy, but lower OD detection ability, because local feature can also help to generalize in-distribution, but maybe not useful for OD detection. So I guess it might exist a classifier. Yeah.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, possible. Yeah.
So I go to next slide, maybe.
Yeah, let's go to the next slides, the genomics part. So
sorry
yeah,
for a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Is it like the performance of the OOD detection? How's the relationship with the in-domain performance? Like, is there like are they positively related, or it just depends on the model?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So from our experience with the VIT model, we see this positive correlation between in-distribution accuracy and out-of-distribution accuracy. And from my previous experience, I also have this kind of intuition. So my intuition behind that is if you have a good in-distribution accuracy, you at least you learned good representation that can reflect to the class labels. So that's a basic requirement for OOD detection, but it may not be the it's necessary but not sufficient. So as you can see in the BIT model, although it has high inlier accuracy, but it does not have that much high OOD detection. So, but for VIT model, what we see is this. We do see this positive correlation between the two metrics, and you can find this figure in our appendix in the paper. Yeah, that's very interesting observation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on. So to test the idea of this pre-training fine-tuning in a different data modality, we tested in the genomic benchmark. Next, please. In the genomic benchmark, we use BERT style pre-training, which is the unsupervised pre-training. It's different from the VIT supervised pre-training. However, although it's a different pre-training, we still see this pre-training plus fine-tuning strategy works for the OOD detection. Here you can see comparing with the 1D CNN, which is a one-dimensional convolutional neural network trained from scratch. Using this BERT pre-training and fine-tuning strategy, we're able to improve the OOD detection performance by 10%, more than 10%. So this is very exciting, showing that no matter what kind of like pre-training, supervised or unsupervised, it seems all help to improve the OOD detection performance. Next slide, please. Since our goal is to explore the limits of the near OOD task, we want to explore other techniques for further improvement. This including the outlier exposure as an effective way. We incorporate OOD samples into training to let the model to learn how to distinguish in distribution versus out of distribution. Next slide, please. So we first explore the method called few-shot outlier exposure. Outlier exposure was proposed by Dan Hierarchical in 2019, but at that moment they were using large amount of outliers for training. So here we propose to use a small number of outliers for training and use this based on this VIT pre-trained model. Because for real applications like this, it often requires very high quality OOD detection performance. So teams usually are willing to collect a handful of known outlier examples. So it's possible to collect a handful outlier examples for training. So what we do is we use those outlier examples for to fine-tune a simple classifier on top of the pre-trained embeddings. And we use the in-distribution classes in addition to the OOD classes. And then the final confidence score is computed as the sum of the probabilities corresponding to the in-distribution classes. Next slide, please. We found this few-shot outlier exposure is very effective. And from the figure, you will see that with just 2 labeled example per outlier class, we are able to further improve the performance to 99% AURC to almost 100%. So this shows that the pre-trained embeddings is well suited for the few-shot outlier exposure, and the training procedure is very fast. Next slide, please. Yeah, we also explore the popular CLIP model. CLIP model is another pre-training model, but it's a multi-model pre-training model for image and text pairs. It pre-trains using image text pairs to maximize the similarity between the embeddings of the image and its corresponding text. It can be used for a classification task. So given an image and given a set of possible class labels, we can compute the similarity score between the image and the class labels in their embedding space. And then the label with the highest similarity score can be used as a predicted label. But here we are more interested in evaluating the out of distribution detection performance for the CLIP model. So next slide, please. So what we do is that we didn't fine-tune the CLIP model. What we did was just use the out of distribution label as the input. So we used the set of in-distribution labels on the left-hand side, and we also use a set of out of distribution labels. We combine them together as a label set, and then given an input image, we compute the similarity between the input image to all the labels, including in-distribution class labels and out-of-distribution class labels. And then we pass the similarity score to a softmax function and then get the probability. Again, we use the sum of the probability for the in-distribution classes as a confidence score. By doing that, we are able to distinguishing in and out of distribution input images, and the performance was pretty good, around 94%. So this indicates that even without, so here we do not know that we do not fine tune the clip model, we just use the clip model as is. So this is zero shot clip model, and then what we only use is outlier labels. And only by exposed to those outlier labels, we are able to achieve this 94% AURC OD detection performance. This is amazing. So this leads to a new field of OD detection, the way how to use the clip model to do the OD detection task. Okay, next slide, please. I want to, so next, we also want to explore another category of the solution, which is density modeling in the latent space. So suppose if we assume that the embedding or the pre-training embedding is very good, then how about we just measure the distance between the test input to the training distribution, like what we did in the Mahalanobis distance, and shouldn't that be a good method for OD detection? So in this section, I will discuss about that. And this is a separate work which is published at ICML Uncertainty and Robustness Deep Learning Workshop this year. Next slide, please. So, so what we did is we compute the Mahalanobis distance from the test input to the training distribution. And then we use that Mahalanobis distance score as the score for distinguishing in and out. And what we see here in the table, that you see the performance for OD detection in this setting is not that good. Especially when we look at the genomics OD, the URC score is even lower than 0.5. So why is that? So if we assume the pre-trained embedding is very good, then why don't we have a good performance on OD detection? We analyzed these failure modes, and we found actually the background in the image can confound the final Mahalanobis distance score. So here I show you an example. So the bird and the airplane are the in-distribution classes. They have blue background, and the ship is out of distribution class. It also has blue background. So when we calculate the Mahalanobis distance, actually it's calculated based on, it's actually a negative log likelihood of the test input under the distribution, right? So when we compute the log likelihood of input, the log likelihood can be regarded as composed by the log likelihood of the background part plus the log likelihood of the semantic part. And if the background part dominates the whole score, then this score cannot be a very good score for distinguishing the in and out, because it's overwhelmed by the background effect. So what we do, next slide, please.
Sorry, I have a question here.
Yeah, sure.
So on the left, you are showing it's based on the classification task, right? You provide labels as well, right?
Yes. So for Mahalanobis distance, yes, we need to fit the class conditional Gaussian for each class. So we assume we know the class labels in the training data.
Yeah, and you do that in feature space, right? Not
yes.
Yes, but on the right explanation, basically first it's unsupervised, then it's basically on pixel space, which is kind of different, right? Yeah, because
yes.
this
This on the right hand side, this is just the intuition behind that. If we want to analyze it, it's more complicated. So just for intuition purpose, I write it like this. Yeah, you are right. Here, X is in the input space. I just make it simple for people to understand that our image is composed by background and semantics, and the likelihood can be affected by the background effect. But the score actually in the embedding space, you are right. The right hand side is just for understanding, not for it's not the mathematical proved.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you are right. Yeah, it's in the X space. So next slide, please. So we proposed a very simple fix. That's to correct the background effect, where we just fit another Gaussian distribution. We call it background distribution on the entire training data, ignoring the class labels. So this is still in the embedding space. So all the Mahalanobis distance is playing in the embedding space. So we fit a background distribution using the entire training data, ignoring the class labels. So in that way, we want the model to learn some shared features, not just class-specific features. And in that way, the model, the background model will describe more towards the background effect. And then the final score we propose is to use the Mahalanobis distance minus the distance to the background, so that the background effect can be corrected. And you can see from the histogram on the at the below, from left to the right, we see that after correcting the background, we have much better AUROC and the separation between the in and out. And next slide, please. You will see more results in the next slides. We tried 4 different OOD benchmarks, including vision, language, and biology. And we show that on all the benchmarks and over all different choices of model architectures, our method improves over the traditional one, the raw Mahalanobis distance score, by up to 15%. So in this work, we propose a zero-shot OOD detection method based on the relative Mahalanobis distance. Okay, let's move on. So now we're done with the first section. So I want to summarize. In this section, we found that OOD detection seems to get way better with pre-training and bigger models. And we found that the pre-training embeddings are well suited for few-shot and zero-shot OOD detection. And we also noticed that in the zero-shot OOD detection task, if we use the pre-trained embeddings, there are some background confounding issues. So we need to correct for that. And for all those exploration, you can see that for this CFAR 10 versus CFAR 100 benchmark, we are almost reaching to the ceiling. So for the next step, we really need harder near OOD benchmarks for us to explore more on this field. Okay, I will move on to the next work, which is more applied work in dermatology. This should take around 5 minutes. I hope it's fine. Okay, this work is for it's applied work for detecting the long tail of unseen conditions. The problem is what I described as earlier as what I described. Thank you. So next slide, please. So in this work, you will see we covers the techniques of representation learning, outlier exposure, and ensembling. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in this work, we created a benchmark data set using this long tail distribution of skin conditions. We have some frequent conditions, and we use them as in-distribution classes. And we have some infrequent conditions, and we leave them as out-of-distribution classes. And we created this train validation test OOD data set. So here we assume we have OOD data for training, and we have also OOD data for test. And we intentionally make the OOD test mutually exclusive from the new OOD training, because we want to mimic the real scenario where you have some unseen and new rare conditions showing up at the test time, which never been trained in the training data. Next slide, please. So in this work, we proposed a hierarchical outlier detection loss called HOD loss. The architecture of the model is like this. For each individual, we have up to 6 images from the skin. And then we feed the image into the feature extractor to get the features. And here we use the pre-trained features, pre-trained encoders. And then after that, we pass it to a fully connected layer and then pass it to a final classification head. And the novel part for this classification head is this HOD loss. So we have inlier classes and we also have outlier classes. We combine them together and do a classification task at each individual class level. And above that, we also do a course level classification where we only classify in and out as a binary classification task. And then our final loss is the combination of the two and weighted by this lambda as a weight to balance the two parts. And this is a good way to, so for the fine-grained level classification, it's good for describing the heterogeneity in the OOD data. And for the course level, it's better for generalization for the new OOD classes in the test data set. So let's move on to the next slides to see the performance. So with this HOD loss, we compare it with a baseline model called reject bucket. So reject bucket is a very simple baseline where they just collapse all the OOD classes into one class and train this one class for OOD. And comparing with that reject bucket baseline, you can see our method HOD loss improve the AURC over the baseline. And this is true for all different kinds of pre-trained model. Here we considered pre-trained using ImageNet or pre-trained using JFT or some other self-supervised pre-trained model like SimClear, MidClear, and so on. And another novel part of this paper is, the next slide, please, is the so-called diverse ensemble. I think this is very interesting because in the pre-training regime, we definitely can do this vanilla ensemble. Can you show me the, yeah, okay. So we know that ensembling can improve the model's robustness, but in the pre-training regime, we know that all the model use the same pre-trained checkpoints. So if we ensemble the models, we're actually ensembling the model trained on the same pre-trained checkpoints, the model fine-tuned on the same pre-trained checkpoint. So the diversity between the model members are much reduced because they are sharing the same pre-trained model checkpoints. So instead, for this particular pre-training model regime, we propose this diverse ensemble where we ensemble models from different loss functions and different pre-training models. And as a result, you can see here, the diverse ensemble achieved much higher AURC and also inlier accuracy. So this indicates that in this pre-training fine-tuning regime, probably the vanilla deep ensemble is no longer that powerful because the models all share the same or use the same pre-trained checkpoint. So we need to be more creative to bring more diversity to the model assembling. Okay, I think next slide, please. So finally, because this is a real application, we want to measure or estimate the downstream clinical cost. So we propose this cost matrix to evaluate the total cost of the model for predicting the in distribution and also detecting the out of distribution. So we assign different costs for different model mistakes. For example, we assign 1.0 for incorrect inlier prediction and assign a cost for outlier wrongly predicted as inlier or inlier wrongly predicted as outlier. So combining all of them, we're able to have an overall estimation of the model's impact in the downstream clinical cost. Okay, so that's all for this part. To sum up, next slide, please.
Before sum up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in my point of view, so you previously did the image-based class, natural image class OD detection, right? Which is based on the semantic labels, and now you move to the medical images. So I think medical images kind of different from the previous task because the class in the medical images are based on very localized region in the picture, right? The disease appear in a localized region in the image, but in the natural image cases, you can see the semantics depends on the, for example, correlation between patches is very global. So here medical images are very local. You need to specific on the very local features. So I'm wondering, since you are doing different tasks, I'm wondering, did you observe any difference across these two tasks? Because intuitively, I think they're different.
Yeah, that's very, yes. So currently we are thinking about applying the VIT to this dermatology task, but we haven't got the result yet. So okay. I think that's a way to test your hypothesis. If VIT model works well there, then it means maybe they share something similar. If the VIT model does not work there, then I think kind of validate your hypothesis that the two tasks are different.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's all for my talk. So I want to summarize my talk today. I talked about several orthogonal directions to improve OOD performance. So one direction is better representation learning. And another one is a few shot, zero shot, or hierarchical outlier exposure. And also ensembling, I talked about diverse ensembling in the regime of pre-training and fine-tuning. And I also talked about the density modeling in the latent space, where the background model may have background effect may confound the density score. And one thing I didn't mention about is the deep generative models. This is a very straightforward idea where you can fit a generative model for the in-distribution data, and then at the test time you evaluate the test input under the generative model you fit, and then evaluate the likelihood score. However, people previously found there are some failure modes in this deep generative model. Sometimes the deep generative model can even assign higher likelihood score to the OOD inputs than the in-distribution input. Previously, I had a work on this, studying this failure mode and proposed a fix for this failure mode. So if you are interested, you're welcome to look at that reference. And finally, I want to give a shout out to my team at Google. We have an open source code base at GitHub called Uncertainty Baselines, where you can find common baseline methods for uncertainty estimation and OOD detection. So you are very welcome to contribute to this code base or just use it in your research work. Thank you very much. That's all for my today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Guys, do you have any questions? I know that you have asked questions in between, but if you do have any questions now.
Hi, I have a quick question. So
sure.
I see that that most of the tasks are conducted on images, have you ever tried any OOD detection in language? And which technique do you think is the most effective?
I think the text OOD detection is also a very, very important field. Suppose you want to detect a topic given a text input, and for training, you may not exclusively include all the topics. So at the test time, your model will be exposed to all kinds of different topics, and some of the topics are not learned by your model. So there's a very strong need for having this OOD detection mechanisms. And so for my relative Mahano-based distance work, I have this OOD detection for intent included in that work, which the intent prediction, which you want to predict what kind of intent of this user's request. And I also see other people using the same dataset for their OOD detection task for evaluating their performance. So that can be a good starting point. And in terms of the difference between the vision and the language, I think the language, I think we can follow the same kind of pre-training strategies as the vision. So we can maybe use the BERT pre-training for the vision task. And sometimes I feel like the text detection, like NLP part, is sometimes more ambiguous for understanding. Sometimes there are multiple understanding of a same sentence, so it requires more better understanding and better evaluation for the performance than the vision. So for vision, it's more straightforward, and it's easier for me to visualize and understand the true and the false. Yeah. I didn't explore a lot on the language field, but I do see people apply some of the methods I developed to the language field. Yeah.
I just noticed that you explicitly modeling the background part when the images are really ambiguous. And I was just thinking about maybe for language, we can also explicitly modeling the ambiguous semantics and, extract the specific part for semantic. So it's just my thought. When thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. So in my this semantic background, actually, this hypothesis was also used in my previous work for deep generative models. So it follows the same logic, and I see people use this generative models in the language field and use it for OOD detection.
All right, then it was great having you, Jie. I mean, that was absolutely wonderful. And I'm sorry about all the glitches that happened. And Mingtian, thank you so much for helping with the slides today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That was fabulous.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
I couldn't make it without your help. Thank you.
No worries.
It is. With Balakrishna, would he like to come in? Do you have any idea? Because I think the time zone doesn't match and he couldn't give the lecture also.
Oh, do you mean Balaji?
Yes, I was thinking of having Balaji, but then I think it is, I think
the time zone is not.
Yeah, so he said, please go to Jie. That's the best he could do. But we'll see if we can bring him also sometime. We can change the timings of the seminar and probably get him to do it.
Yeah. He's very, very good at this uncertainty estimation and reliable deep learning field. So yeah, it will be great to have him here.